Yeah, I think this is quite a dangerous moment. Again, looking at Oklo stock, and it's gone, straight to the moon over the last, even over the last month, enormous increases. And if that's not screaming bubble territory, then I'm not sure what is, because what has fundamentally changed over the last month with Oklo is not a lot. So I'm quite afraid that this is hype and speculation.
Welcome back to Decouple. Today, I'm joined by returning guest, Michael Seeley, aka the Atomic Blender. Michael joined me for an episode about a month ago on the history and current operations of Rosatom. That was a big success, and I think deservedly so. Really, really interesting exploration of the topic with someone who's spent a lot of time deep diving the topic himself. So go back and check that out if you haven't already. At that time, I was commenting that it was really quite shocking that it had taken so long to have Michael on the show. And so we're making up for that. We were having you back in pretty quick succession because I guess of a sort of mutual fascination with what is happening in the nuclear stock market. Michael, are we in a bubble moment right now?
Are we in a bubble? It's hard to say. I mean, it depends who you're asking, but I would say we're exhibiting a lot of the characteristics that you would see in a bubble. In particular, some stocks are starting to jump up way more than they would expect based on fundamentals or anything kind of grounded in reality. Others are performing more reasonably, but I think there are a few outliers that we'll get to talk to you about today.
I mean, certainly having been in the nuclear advocacy game for 7 or 8 years now, it has been exciting seeing the turn in terms of social acceptance and within the finance community as well. I mean, nuclear was really was excluded from a lot of portfolios as a sin stock, alongside, I don't know, trade in exotic endangered species pelts. But in all seriousness, there was a lot of funds that excluded nuclear, and now the finance sector is very interested. I think the rise of uranium has been a big part of this, as well as the AI boom, and questions again about how we will power that. And I think what I'm seeing and what I've noted is there's a lot of interest coming from Silicon Valley, obviously, where a lot of the AI demand is being hypothesized and developed, but also where there is this sort of like tech disruptive mentality, which looks at a sector like nuclear, which has been sort of chasing its tail for 50 years, not really building much, operating very well, and thinking, hey, this sector is ripe for disruption. And so we have a few companies and advanced reactor companies that have gone public, and there's not a lot of places to put your money if you're interested in the space outside of uranium, maybe Constellation with its revival of 3 Mile Island. But there's a few outlets for this enthusiasm for the sector, and one of them is Oklo. And man, if you bought Oklo, a year ago, you've seen a 1,500% increce.
Exactly. I mean, only a year ago, if you put in, I think it was around like $10 or something now, and now it's up to 140, 150, stabilizing over the last couple of days. But it's been an absolutely parabolic kind of takeoff that Oklo has experienced, at least in stock price. And a lot of that, of course, is being fueled by AI and data center speculation. They've opened up a bunch of new avenues that Oklo says they're going to pursue, such as fuel reprocessing and recycling, medical isotopes, and that kind of stuff. I mean, Oklo has absolutely, on their own, kind of taken off, and they're leading the charge of a bunch of other companies. I think a lot of the other ones would have been increasing on their own, but Oklo is pulling a lot of things with them, simply because of what you're talking about, where you have this AI boom, you have this interest in what's going to power the future, clean energy and new technology and disruption within the nuclear energy industry. And Oklo has been a bit of the poster child for that over the last 5 years or so, since they first came onto the scene. And they've been very good at marketing. They've been able to show off that, look, what we can do it all. These guys are not doing it correctly. This market is clean. It's ready. The technology is mature, and we're here to disrupt it and make it happen. And I'm using the word disrupt not necessarily in a negative way. I think your point about, over the last 50 years, nuclear energy has been operating well, and it's been moving along okay, not really building anything new, at least not in the West. But that does kind of have the classic framing for Silicon Valley. You have a market that is kind of standard, or it's been around, like taxis and hotels and whatever. And you say, okay, can I get some new technology in there, or in this case, maybe some old technology? Look at it again and see what we can do to change that. And in some cases, that of course is for the better. And in other cases, with any kind of change, there's going to be winners and losers. People are going to be upset because their livelihoods or their past experience is maybe not going to be the same way going forward. But Silicon Valley has done a lot of good, I would say, overall, in terms of being able to enhance communications. And nuclear has become one of the targets, like I said, for both green, clean energy, low carbon, advanced technology, and leadership. And it's an area that has stagnated for a number of decades now, at least in the West, and becomes a great target for people like Oklo to come along and say, okay, we're going to try and do something different.
And to be clear, I mean, we've seen other nuclear-related stocks have, I guess, similar trajectories, but over a longer period. Like if you were lucky enough to have been on the uranium thesis and bought Cameco, I believe in 2020, you would have bought it about $12, and now it's about $120. So not quite, 1,500%, but close. Over a longer time period, and perhaps with some fundamentals that justify that. I think what's, grabbing the headlines right now, there was a Forbes article, how AI minted 2 new billionaires from a company with no revenue, is this idea, again, of, how inflated the stock has become despite not generating any revenue, despite, and we'll get into this in more detail, not having an NRC-approved design, not having any firm offtake agreements. Things look a little bit shaky in terms of, your sort of P&E analyses and things like that. I'm no... this is not financial advice for both of us. I think we can make that disclaimer. But I've very, very limited skills in terms of any kind of stock analysis myself. But things just seem a little bit fishy here. Riff on that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right here. If you look at Cameco, which is a great example of a company that is well diversified, they have mining, conversion, transportation. They have, they actually produce uranium that gets converted and used in nuclear reactors. They are now part owner, 49% of Westinghouse, an actual company that has been around and actually built reactors, does services, does fuel all over the world. And Cameco makes money. Like you said, if you had bought in a few years ago, you would have had this nice slow rise as the interest in nuclear has picked up over the last 5 years. And I think that's an accurate reflection of Cameco's position and their future prospects. We have all of these new companies coming in that are going to need uranium, and Cameco is well positioned to provide not only the uranium, but also services and everything that these companies would need. Oklo, on the other hand, is completely different. Oklo behaves not at all like a traditional nuclear company. They are 100% following the model of a Silicon Valley startup, an Instagram or something like that, that has zero revenue at the beginning, which is understandable. You have a new company, a large hard tech product that takes a long time to produce, and it's understandable that that would take some time to come out. But what we aren't seeing with Oklo is, one, we haven't really seen a finalized design, at least not publicly. They did have their original design that was submitted to the NRC in 2020 and then was rejected in 2022 for lack of information. We'll talk about that in a bit. But their current design, which is much larger than the original one, we haven't seen. They're in preliminary discussions with the NRC, but everything that is publicly available is very high level. We talked about the codes that we're going to use and the standards that we're going to use. There's no details. There are no firm orders for Oklo. And this is something that, again, that separates Oklo from some of the other startups. We see Kairos Power signing a PPA with TVA and Google. So it's a small reactor, but at least they have something slightly more concrete. We have seen traditional power like Constellation Energy for restarting reactors like 3 Mile Island to sell to Microsoft. We have Amazon that has not signed a PPA, but they are working quite closely with X-Energy, and the intent is quite clear there that through investment and other means that X-Energy would be a provider to Amazon. Oklo doesn't have any of these things. They claim to have the largest booking of non-binding agreements for power purchase of around, I think, 14 gigawatts last I saw, and maybe they've added a small amount since then. But the important thing here is that these are non-binding agreements. These are just agreements on paper, memorandums of understanding that, okay, Oklo, once you get a reactor design, we're kind of first in line to talk about what it would actually be. There's no money changing hands yet. One of the agreements, they have suggested that there would be some sort of prepayment, but we haven't seen, or they haven't announced any actual transactions for that. And what these companies normally need to do, even tech companies like Instagram, WhatsApp, whatever, you do have to at some point show long-term booking of revenue and contracts, especially for hard tech like nuclear. That's going to take you 5 years a minimum of construction. And right now, Oklo's valuation in stocks seems to be floating on the promise that, yes, the technology is great, and you're starting to build and you have a lot of favor with the current U.S. administration. And that is sufficient for us to believe that your stock valuation is going to be, $20 billion, last I saw, for this company that has no definite product, no contracts, and no clear path to actually getting that revenue beyond some initial master power purchase agreements that are non-binding at this point.
Okay, so Michael, I'm curious about Oklo's initial application to the NRC. I understand it's rare to have an application rejected, even without prejudice. Can you fill us in on a bit more of those details?
Yeah, so Oklo's original application for the 1.5 megawatt electric plant is really interesting. Like you said, it is very rare for the NRC to actually go and reject publicly with a letter saying, nope, sorry, we're canceling your application due to insufficient information and you're being non-responsive. But one of the things that is in that application is normally when the NRC expects a combined operating license application for construction and operation, is they expect it to be complete. I mean, if you look at the two-step process where you have a construction license and then an operating license, you can defer a number of things to the operating license. So things like operator training, what your security plan is going to be, you can leave some of those things out because you're talking more about the design of the plant and the construction. When you do a combined license, everything has to be there. The NRC only has really this one shot to say yes or no. And so Oklo goes in with their application and they commit a number of what I would consider very amateur type of sins in an application. They leave out large sections, and I'll say what I mean by that in a second. And they come up with what they consider a novel approach to safety analysis. And NRC has a lot of guidance, and a lot of it is based on light water technology and how the reactor should behave and the accidents you have to consider. So, overpower transient, underpower transient, loss of flow, increased flow, loss of the generator, all these categories that you're supposed to consider. And while a lot of the guidance has been built around light water technology, a lot of it still applies if you're talking about a fast reactor, even a very small one like Oklo. But what Oklo does in their application is they say, no, we don't want to follow that approach where here's the list of things that we need to consider. We went back and we did a literature search on the foundations of the NRC, and we've come up with our own safety analysis approach, what we call the maximum credible accident. And instead of, analyzing all these different types of accidents, we're going to find the single worst accident, and that's what we're going to base everything off of. In light water space, this would be the equivalent of if you went and said the loss of coolant accident, the LOCA accident, is the worst accident, and therefore we're going to set everything on that and not bother doing anything else because we've already said LOCA is the worst accident, so we don't need to do any other analysis. And that is fundamentally what the maximum credible analysis approach that Oklo proposed to the NRC. NRC says that, okay, that's not following our typical guidance, but we conceptually don't see anything wrong with this approach. If you want to try and bound everything by a single accident, then okay, we'll hear you out. The problem with their approach is that, again, it was, in NRC's words, it was not repeatable and not fundamentally sound. It was very kind of high level of like, okay, you start by thinking of what are all of the things that could go wrong. There could be a hurricane, there could be a forest fire, the operator could do this, the pipe over here could break. But there's no rigorous set of things that you need to consider within this methodology. So NRC says, well, you need to make this more rigorous so that it's repeatable, because if we approve this methodology, it could be used not just on your plant, but light water reactors over here could say, well, we want to use that methodology as well. So it needs to be something that can be done over and over. Oklo revises the methodology 2-3 times. They have multiple meetings with the NRC, public meetings, and NRC still is pointing out that you're not being detailed enough. It's still not a repeatable type of methodology, and it's just not going to work. So that was NRC's big complaint. The other area of their application that was problematic, and again, if anybody who's looked at licensing applications, you go and you see, okay, this section contains information on whatever. Major portions, Oklo included in their application a list of, I want to say, around a dozen or so areas where they wanted exemptions. And these were not like small exemptions. We're like, oh, we're going to, change this pump to this pump. They asked for exemptions on operator training entirely, because they said, Oklo is not like other reactors. We don't need to train our operators because it's automatic and so safe that anybody can do it. So their operator application portion is 2 pages long. They then said things like, well, we don't need fitness for duty programs. We don't need cybersecurity. We don't need, environmental release of radioactive material because the reactor is so safe. There's no credible way for a radioactive release. So we don't need to include that in our application. And this is one of the things that I think I struggle with Oklo, is this kind of, yes, changing the way we license reactors is maybe important, but you're coming in with a team of 22 people, no real experience in operating a plant, designing a plant, and you're now instructing the NRC and telling them that this area is outside of your regulations because we think the design is so safe it's not even a concern. And as the regulator, I don't know how they could take that, but that kind of approach of instructing the regulator about how to do their jobs and how they should be interpreting the regulations seems a bit off to me. Another area is if you look at the tech specs that they included. If you look at normal light water reactor plants, the tech specs guide what operators need to do under certain conditions. If a pump breaks or is out of service, what compensatory actions or other actions need to be taken. And normally tech specs are, in a large light water reactor, maybe 300 pages long just for the actual tech specs. Oklo comes in with 2 tech specs. One is that the plant needs to shut down within 4 seconds of a reactor trip signal. And the other is the reactor trip signal needs to be working. And that's it. So nothing about the thermocouples on the heat pipe that they're using to credit the reactor trip signal, nothing about the ultimate heat sink or the heat rejection systems, nothing about how the flow is inside, none of the characteristics, all these things that you would normally see in a reactor. Oklo leaves all of those out. And this is what they go to the NRC with. So when NRC rejects the application and they say there's not enough information and you're not answering our RIIs, this is the initial starting point. And this is Oklo's actual position in the papers and in the operating license that they've made. This is their starting position that they're trying to then defend with the NRC. So in my mind, it's no surprise that after 2 years, the NRC basically gave up and said, look, you're not cooperating. You're not giving us the information that we need.
It seems like going through the regulatory process, it can be burdensome. There's definitely reforms that need to happen at the NRC, but it also does help you refine your thinking, and it does make you, rigorously plan out your technology and hopefully have less problems down the road because you actually had to consider a lot of failure modes, for instance. But yeah, that sounds a little bit amateur hour.
Yeah, I don't want to say that it's complete amateur hour, but it is what, if somebody had told you, okay, these are the regulations, like, well, our design doesn't do that, so we'll just ignore that. And that's not, I don't know who was giving them advice at that time. My understanding is now that they have a much stronger team. They've incorporated a lot of NRC staff within their organization. So I would not expect a repeat. Let me just be clear that I would not expect a repeat for round 2, but on round 1, that's a lot of credibility that you've burned with the regulator, who is clearly trying to work with you and setting up a custom review process to meet with you and figure out how to make it work, and have the regulator educate you on what your application should look like and contain. And then basically to refuse that, it's no surprise that it ends up being rejected.
I mean, lots to unpack there. I mean, I was struck just doing a little bit of background. 120 employees as of 2024. I think that had grown by about 40%. I imagine most of these employees are not all engineers. There's definitely some communications people. They did win an architecture award for the iconic A-frame reactor building. So there's a certain amount of money that's being spent on comms, government relation, et cetera. I mean, but really a bold business plan. I mean, a Rosatom-like business plan of build, own, operate. And with a lean staff of 120 people, I mean, just holding the two up together. Like, you basically couldn't have anything more opposite in terms of, I mean, both proposing a build, own, operate model, but in terms of the differences between the companies, I mean, go back and listen to the episode last week, but, the vertical integration of 300 subsidiaries, 500,000 employees. We're talking about a whole kind of different side of things, but it is, I guess, opposite sides of the spectrum. When you talk about this kind of design instability and the rejection by the NRC of their design review, I mean, things are changing really rapidly. Initially, what was being proposed was a 1.5 megawatt sodium fast reactor. We're still in sodium fast reactor territory, but now things have rapidly been moving up. Not in one big jump, but I guess in little leaps and bounds. So maybe let's dwell on that a little bit and talk about the design itself and this kind of instability. The idea is to build off of EBR-II. Describe what that was, how long it operated for, and I guess just the lineage of Oklo's reactor design.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. And there is a lot of background and technology that Oklo is working with here. Like you said, EBR-II, which was a experimental breeder reactor 2, operated at Idaho National Laboratory for about 30 years, from 1964 to 1994 or so. Was I think it was around 150 megawatts electric, something like that, or around 60 megawatts. But so it's not an enormous reactor, but it did have a lot of importance for the sodium fast reactor community in terms of, demonstrating the technology and showing that fuel recycling could be part of it. And so this concept of, we can operate a different kind of reactor from the traditional light water reactor, one that more or less breeds its own fuel so you can operate indefinitely and never have to worry about fuel, has been the goal of the most nuclear programs like the US for a long time, since the beginning, shortly after Manhattan Project. The goal is uranium might be limited in the world. How can we make the best use of it going forward? It turned out that there was much more uranium than was originally supposed, but the concept and the testing was still there. So EBR-II operates for 30 or so years, shuts down because when the reactor is old, there are the usual problems with sodium. Sodium is highly reactive in contact with air and water, has a lot of corrosion issues. There are a number of challenges with it. And so we have Oklo come in. We have 2 MIT graduates that do their studies, and they come in and they say, that's really great. Why did we abandon this technology? And it is a reasonable question to ask, because there are other countries like Russia and Rosatom that have done fast reactors, and they've been doing it more or less continuously. So why not us too? So Oklo comes in and they say, well, what can we do? We can make a super simple version of this, because our position is that the nuclear industry has become far too complex. The reactors are too big and complicated, and you guys are overthinking the problem. It's much simpler than it should be. We can make a small reactor, 4 megawatts thermal, 1.5 megawatts electric. It's basically a microreactor at that point. And their initial design comes out in 2019. They have a very small staff at this point. I think the number was around like 22 staff in 2021, as they've been reported as saying. So if you're comparing to large designers like Rosatom, Westinghouse, with hundreds or thousands of staff that are on any individual project, this is a very small team that's trying to make a reactor. So they go in. It's a passive design, more or less passive design. It's using heat pipe technology because the power level is so low. So they're not doing any kind of direct force circulation. The heat removal is relatively passive. And there's nothing wrong with that. Westinghouse eVinci design is somewhat similar with a passive heat pipe type of design, again, for low power. And Oklo's position is that this design, because it's so simple, it's so small, it's walk-away safe, there's nothing really to worry about. They go to the NRC and say, look, we'd like to license our reactor. We want to do a combined operating construction license, a COL, under Part 52. And we're going to do it at Idaho National Laboratory. We've talked to them. We've got it all figured out. Okay. NRC looks at the application. It's their first non-light water reactor application that they've either ever received or in a very, very long time. So NRC is also a little bit curious about this. And this is something that they want to be a part of. So they look at it and they say, okay, you're missing some stuff, but we're willing to work with you. We'll operate, normally we would expect, a complete application for a COL, a combined operating construction license, but you're new, this is different technology. We'll try and make that work. We'll give you a custom approach where, we can do it a little bit piecemeal, and we'll work with you through on that. After about 2 years of going around on this, NRC more or less has enough. Oklo, small staff, whatever reason you want to give, is not able to provide the technical information and the justifications that they need in order to be able to get this reactor through the NRC licensing process. And NRC eventually says, it's not going to work, we're going to have to stop, and rejects it and says, look, we gave you a lot of chances, you didn't really answer our questions, it's not going to work. So Oklo then goes back to the drawing board in early 2022, and they start thinking about what they need to do. And again, this is all what they've publicly stated. So in the background, maybe they're doing something else, but at least publicly they said, okay, well, Oklo says, we'll work on a larger design. We'll increase the 1.5 megawatts electric output. We'll ditch the heat pipes. We'll go to a circulating type of flow, much more similar to what EBR-II has. And we'll increase the power to 15 megawatts with the goal of maybe expanding it up to 50 megawatts. So at this point, Oklo has more or less abandoned the fundamentals of their original design, which was ultra small, low power density, walk away, simplicity, no problems. And they work on this design for the next 3 years or so. And during that time, they do a bunch of hiring. So they do increase their staff from 22 up to around 120 now, which is certainly a good thing if you're working on a big project like this. And then late last year and early this year, they make another announcement in both their financial reporting for investors and publicly to the media that the reactor design has been increased again from 50 megawatts now up to 75 megawatts electric. So we've gone from an original, really small, something that fits nicely in that A-frame of 1.5 megawatts up to 75. So to say that if you looked at like an AP1000 or something and you went from, there was concerns that the stretch from the AP600 up to the AP1000 was already quite a bit of a stretch of, so that's a bit more than 50%. Here we're talking, a huge multiple of 50 times larger. So the fundamentals of the original design are completely different from what you would have had in the original small reactor. And now they're starting to actually build this under the Department of Energy license. We'll talk about that later. But this change in design over the course of a few years in response to okay, maybe the small reactor design isn't going to work. Maybe we need to have something that's more data center friendly. 75 megawatts is actually a pretty good spot if you have a couple of these reactors to support data centers compared to 1.5. And it becomes this new design, again, that we haven't really seen, but it exists, I'm sure. And it's going to be the new Oklo design that gets presented and pushed out for us.
So many questions. So many questions.
Okay, hit me.
I guess one of them, like what seized the headlines earlier this week, was a bunch of people in suits with shovels, shoveling some dirt at Idaho National Lab. So maybe there's a licensing process I'm not aware of through DOE where you can sort of sidestep the NRC and just start building something. But are they building a reactor there? Are they building an office building? Are they building balance of plant? Are they just laying down some HVAC? Like what is going on there? Because again, the initial progress, if we want to call it that, and it sounds pretty unusual that your applications, I guess it was rejected without prejudice. They said, come on back if you want, yeah. But that is, I think, fairly rare that you have a rejection like that. Again, for a reactor design that, will still be a sodium fast reactor, but, radically different in terms of, as you said, heat pumps now or heat pipes now for pumped coolant, et cetera. And again, fitting inside the A-frame. It's never really made sense to me in terms of having a kind of heavy crane that can move things around. Like we usually think of having a more sort of cylindrical reactor building and, being able to have a little more access, move things around. I always question the A-frame, but we'll leave that aside right now. I guess the big question is what exactly is being built at INL? What can they build at INL, given that, they really haven't had this reactor reviewed and approved?
So they are bypassing NRC for now. So what DOE can do under the Atomic Energy Act, Department of Energy is permitted to authorize the construction and license of reactors for itself. So Oklo has a contract, we'll call it a contract and agreement, with Department of Energy to supply a reactor for their purposes. And this is the way that the Department of Energy reactors at Idaho National Laboratory have been built in the past. They're not commercial reactors. They're not for officially really civilian use. They're Department of Energy reactors. NRC is responsible for civilian licensing of reactors, but under the recent executive orders, such as unleashing the American energy, or whatever the title was, the idea is that we would push new reactors under the DOE program, under the existing law of the Atomic Energy Act, and then NRC would have reduced scope in terms of a review later on, because the argument is that Department of Energy has already reviewed and presumably accepted the design that's going up. So Oklo is going to be working under that framework with Department of Energy. So far, they have not received actual approval from Department of Energy to go and build this. But so what they're building right now is initial groundworks. They did some initial borehole drilling a few months ago to do ground samples to make sure that the environmental impacts and things are all okay. The groundbreaking now is for support structures. It's not nuclear yet. Oklo doesn't actually even have any nuclear fuel yet. They have an agreement with Department of Energy, and they're working through the licensing of getting that in place in order to use actually some old nuclear fuel from EBR-II. But they don't have approvals yet. On their own website, they show about 50% progress, with the main point being that they're preparing the safety analysis report that's going to go for review. But at this point, it's still early shovels. It's more of a ceremony than an actual start of construction at this point.
So putting this into perspective, you mentioned earlier, there have been sodium fast reactors built around the world. The U.S. had several. I believe the first electricity produced in the U.S., several light bulbs worth. Was that EBR-I?
That was EBR-I.
EBR-I. So there is a storied history. It seems like the only country that's been able to actually maintain certainly a commercial sodium fast reactor fleet have been the Russians. Otherwise, it's been a bit of a checkered history. There's I think a couple sodium fast reactor research reactors still in operation. Maybe one in India. There's one in Japan that was shut down. There's Super Phoenix in France, which is a commercial plant that didn't last very long. Overall, this lineage has really struggled. With, again, the exception of the Russian fleet. I was struck just looking for, comparators. The Chinese have embarked on a sodium fast reactor project with Russian assistance, starting in the 90s, pulling in Russia's, many decades of experience, really going back to the 50s. And it took them about 22, 23 years to go from concept to, actually delivering electrons to the grid, which seemed really slow, frankly, given that they're able to collaborate so closely with Russia and all the research it's done, and also just the enormous size of, we haven't done our CNNC episode yet, Michael, on the capabilities of the Chinese nuclear industry. But 20-something years for China to pull this off. It seems like Oklo's claims of producing electricity by 2027 seem a little starry-eyed.
Yeah. So a couple of things there that I think are really important. One, the Russians and what they've been doing. So they've been operating the BR and the BN series of reactors essentially since the 1950s. These are some early test reactors that are fast sodium, and they do have a fast lead reactor as well. And they've been in continuous operation since the 1950s. They have the Bor 60, which has been quite famous in the industry for being able to take on a lot of different samples. It's again a sodium fast reactor that is used mostly for testing of materials. But they've also scaled up. They had the BN 350, which was a kind of prototype of a commercial fast sodium fast reactor. Then they scaled that up to the BN 600. That's been operating now since the 1980s. And the even larger version, the BN 800, has permission now and is expected to be running. And they want to scale up even further. They want to go full commercial operation and have exports with these sodium fast reactors. So they have a BN 1000, BN 1200 in the works of, real large sodium fast reactors that are reliable because they've had this huge operating history that they can get through. They have the materials testing, they have the fuels testing, they've done the hot cell work, they've done all the real legitimate groundwork that's required in order to get something like this up and running. And when we look at Oklo, we see a small team of about 120, 130 people trying to do a full vertical integration. So before this, I went and I pulled some numbers of how big are the staff in Rosatom's divisions that are responsible for the BN reactors. And there are two main groups. There's the Rosatom Afrinikatov division. I don't know how to pronounce that correctly, but this is the main production group that's responsible for construction and operation. They have 4,000 staff, and of that, around 1,600 are responsible for the engineering, testing, design, and that portion. Now, not all of them are going to be on the BN 600, 800, 1000, but that does mean that they have specialization and people that are capable of working on multiple projects and being able to get the design right. These are not simple machines, as much as Oklo would like us to believe. The other group is the Institute of Power and Physics, and both of these are under Rosatom. These are two Rosatom subsidiaries. And this is the main research and development arm. And they have around 2,000 people, and they're primarily responsible for materials testing, neutronics, figuring out physics. They have high energy physics, laser physics, and fast reactor testing. They have all the hot cells. They have all the equipment that's necessary. So combined, if you're looking at just technical staff between the two, you have nearly 2,000 to 3,000 staff that are dedicated within Rosatom, just within these two subsidiaries, not even the manufacturing, not even all the other balance of plant parts that come in. These are the groups that are making a single BN 800 work. And you look at what Oklo's trying to do with their staff they don't have any practical experience because there are no sodium fast reactors operating in the US. They're relying on EBR-II data, which, while valuable, is from the 1960s through the early 1990s. And while that's useful, Rosatom is out there with their staff, running experiments, testing new fuel, and making it work. You mentioned that China on their reactor had a lot of help from the Russians. I recently spoke to the Rosatom representative at the IEA General Conference, and I asked him, how much did Rosatom actually help on the China fast reactor? And he kind of smiled and he said, maybe 50-50. But he added that, sodium is not like water. It's not easy to understand, and it's much more difficult to work with. And very few people have experience in dealing with it. And Rosatom in Russia, we have that experience, so we were happy to help out the Chinese. And so, like you said, these are two massive companies. I don't want to sell the Chinese short. And maybe in the 90s they were struggling a little bit, but within the last 10 years, CNNC in China is certainly on their game and they know what they're doing. And if these two companies, it takes them 10 years to build a single reactor with 50 years of experience behind them, 4,000 technical staff, integration from all of the supporting organizations for steam generators and electric generators, the Russian state government with more or less unlimited funds at your disposal. How is Oklo going to compete with that? And in 2 years, create a reactor that is going to be up and running and work with any kind of reliability? That's really my fundamental question about how Oklo is going to achieve this.
Right. I mean, just a few comments. Like when you talk about 4,000 technical staff, these are likely people whose specialty is in this area and they have, 20, 30-year career in it. And, just getting to know the industry better here, the value of the gray hairs in this sector is enormous. There's so much esoteric knowledge of the nuclear. It's so specialized. So it's not just that, these people just started dabbling in sodium fast reactors in Russia. It's that, maybe even their parents worked in it, for God's sakes. The program goes back that far, 70, 80 years. I'm struck by the numbers. So as I understand it, there's the BN-600 and the BN-800 in operation. So we have essentially 1,400 megawatts of commercial fast reactor capacity in Russia. Oklo is going to do an order of magnitude more than that, according to these power purchase agreements, 14,000 megawatts. And I guess this is what that valuation depends on, is them producing power very quickly. This very innovative, questionably innovative build on operate model where they're going to have this guaranteed revenue stream because they'll just be selling this power and getting this premium price for providing low carbon power to data centers. The money's going to come, pouring in a steady fashion. These things are going to operate well, so the money will pour in. Just again, that order of magnitude more with an order of magnitude less staff and essentially no one who's actually got their hands dirty in sodium fast reactors, I think is questionable. Let's explore a little bit the reasons why this particular company has exploded in this way. You did a video on this. You looked at Transatomics, another company that was looking at this issue of how do we transform America's 90,000 tons of high-level waste into something useful? How do we slay the bogeyman of nuclear waste? How do we change the narrative on nuclear power from, that's one of the main objections that has come up historically has been, what about the waste? What do you do about it? And it strikes me that has become such a powerful narrative and motivator and, source of media attention. If you can solve this, untie this Gordian knot of nuclear waste, then you've essentially solved all the problems of nuclear energy and may 1,000 reactors bloom. And my read on this is that that's important to explaining the momentum of this company. Maybe not as we get into sort of the Sam Altman's backing and his special purpose acquisition company and the 500 million there, but just in terms of the early days. Maybe you can do a sort of comparison with Transatomics or just provide your thoughts on my waste thesis as a sort of potent motivator for raising this company's profile.
Your waste thesis is spot on. And this is something that I think I'll give a little bit of a personal story here that is maybe archetypal for nuclear engineers like myself. So, and I can imagine that, the founders of Transatomic, another startup that was going to, promise that, well, are going to end nuclear waste and it's going to be infinitely recyclable, just like Oklo has said. So every nuclear engineer, when they're in university, they go through their initial reactor design class, the reactor theory class. And you're sitting there and you're trying to get, your neutronics to work out. You're trying doing these little simple 1D type of slab reactors. And you're like, okay, I need to get, make sure the moderator's in there and okay, and get the reflectors right so that I'm not losing too many neutrons. And then they start to introduce things like we're going to have waste fission products. So your absorption rate's going to go up and you're going to lose all these neutrons and it's going to be difficult. And then at some point during this class, they get to fast reactors. And every single student who's sitting there has this light bulb moment where you're just like, what? Because now instead of the waste poisoning your reactor and slowing you down, having to do reloads, you go from a neutron multiplication, just barely scraping by. You now have extra neutrons that you can deal with. Absorption becomes much smaller. And those extra neutrons are now, instead of being wasted, being lost in an absorption where nothing happens, you're actually creating more fuel. And this moment, it's hard to describe if you don't sit in the class and you go through it, but it is the inspiration for, I would say, every single one of these fast reactor companies, because there is a bit of a pattern here where these companies come out, usually fresh graduate, and they say fast reactors are clearly the way to go. In an academic sense, you're absolutely right. There is no reason to be sitting here with slower thermal reactors. Fast reactors are clearly technically superior in an academic sense. And so that becomes the inspiration for all of these guys. And I know that because I've lived through it. I had the exact same epiphanic moment where I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, we should be doing this. Why are we not doing this? Why are we wasting time on slow thermal reactors? So this origin story, this genesis of where these guys come from, or where you get this idea, comes from that. And then you say, okay, how can I make that happen? You go and you look and you say, oh, there's EBR-II. The Russians have been doing it. It's technically possible. Why not us too? And so you start down that path with not a whole lot more than an academic understanding of this is how a fast reactor works, and this is the theory behind it, which is good and certainly important. But we look at companies like Transatomic and Oklo, and their initial designs, in Transatomic's case, they made a calculational error in the neutronics early on that was caught during a kind of informal review by professors at MIT that found that their waste annihilating molten salt reactor was actually not going to annihilate so much waste. It was not going to get 75 times usage compared to a light water reactor. It was going to get at best 2. And so that reality of when you start to come into, okay, I have to actually get the neutronics to work. It's complicated. Big problems are going to be in sodium with corrosion and in terms of being able to manage the materials control. Water is easy to understand and control. Sodium is not. You have a whole bunch of other things you have to deal with. So Oklo and a lot of these other startups, they come in, they're excited. Understandably, they're going to disrupt the paradigm of, we've been doing nuclear wrong all these years. We're going to fix it. Initial designs come out. NRC starts to ask some questions. Technically, it doesn't go so well. Back to the drawing board. Okay, we'll come up again and we'll make a second attempt. And that's where Oklo is now. They're on their second attempt. Transatomic Power didn't get a second attempt. They folded before they could get any farther. But it's much more challenging than these companies, I think, are willing to admit. From an academic perspective, yeah, it's great. But as the Russians will tell you, sodium is hard and fast reactors are hard.
I think I was watching, as maybe a Fox News business segment with Jacob DeWitt, the CEO and one of the co-founders, just saying, hey, we have 90,000 tons of nuclear waste in our fast reactors. That's equivalent of 1.3 trillion barrels of oil. Kind of inferring that it's an easy thing to transmute that, or that you get the utility that you would out of oil out of spent nuclear fuel. And it just sounds a lot more complicated. The rationale for these fast reactors to begin with was uranium scarcity and the idea that we were going to run out and could breed fuel and be much more efficient with our existing uranium. And that just seems to not be a major concern. And I mean, even the BN series, to what I understand, they're not breeding fuel. That becomes complicated. You need to then take that plutonium and extract it and do all sorts of processes to it to turn it into and fabricate new fuel and put it back in to the reactor. This is all expensive. It adds cost.
Yeah, the Soviets or the Russian BN reactors, they aren't doing fuel reprocessing on a full scale. They've done some test assemblies to demonstrate the process, but that's about it. It's not a full scale production at this point.
Like, I guess just to pin you down, like is the spent nuclear fuel inventory of the U.S. this like incredible asset that's going to create really affordable, cheap energy, and we can just turn this waste into, you know, one man's trash is another man's treasure? Is it that sort of situation, or is it perhaps a little more complicated? It sounds like a leading question, and it kind of is, but.
Then I'll take the contrarian point and say, yeah, it is a treasure that we're sitting on. And one of the reasons that I make this claim is that spent nuclear fuel, you know, most of it is still okay. You have your transuranics and a couple of fission products that are quite dangerous and difficult, but the vast majority is still okay. Again, from an academic standpoint, that's great. And that's why you would see somebody like Jacob DeWitt talking about like, oh, we have all this stuff, we can make it into new nuclear fuel and it will run us forever. Of course, the problem then becomes when you go to reprocess it. You have to transport something highly radioactive, and Department of Energy, to their credit, has done a lot of work in making it possible to transport nuclear fuel in the U.S. There's some excellent videos of the tests that they've done on the casks where they ram it with freight trains, they light it on fire, they fire missiles at it. It's really quite impressive. So the transportation is technically not that difficult, but of course it's going to be expensive to do. But then when you get to the actual separation, and you have a couple of different processes for this, you have the Purex process, which is the more traditional approach where you're separating out plutonium. And now you have the pyroprocessing technique, which is what Oklo is pursuing, based off of some work done at Idaho National Laboratory. These are not demonstrated on a large scale. They've worked in the lab and are commercially not really demonstrated. I'm not going to say they're not possible, but they're just not demonstrated yet, at least in the US. So it's not a necessarily as easy thing. It's not like picking up lawn clippings off of your you know, you mow the grass and there's some extra lawn clippings and you collect them up into a bag and you can burn them and now you get some free heat. It's much more complicated. You now need to start separating out little pieces. You need to like, well, this one, you know, it's not going to work with this. We need to concentrate it down. And then once you concentrate it down, you need to convert it into a glass and perhaps bury it from there, or you can try and put it into a fast reactor and destroy these long-lived transuranics that you don't want. It's not a straightforward type of thing. But the asset, as we call it, the spent nuclear fuel sitting at all these sites, it's not going anywhere. It's perfectly safe. And once somebody figures out, and maybe that will be Oklo, how to effectively and efficiently get what you need out of that, then you are sitting on something that's quite useful. Because right now, this is a liability for a lot of the plants. The reactors that are sitting on the spent fuel, they're paying for the upkeep of the spent fuel in dry storage and in the wet storage. But if there's a path to then be able to say, well, yeah, we can sell it, then it becomes much more attractive for existing plants and for somebody who can effectively and cheaply take it and then have a customer on the other end who needs reprocessed fuel.
And to be clear, we do have fuel reprocessing in places like France, for instance, at La Hague, where a significant amount of their spent PWR fuel is reprocessed and turned into this mixed oxide fuel, which powers a percentage of their fleet. It's not cheap, but and the facility is many billions of dollars, but it exists. It's doing something like this. Not fast reactors, but yes, making MOX. Again, looking at this meteoric rise, the board composition is quite interesting. You know, having Sam Altman back your company was certainly a home run, I think, in terms of this trajectory into a $20.7 billion market cap as of, I think, market close earlier this week, which you mentioned was about half that of Cameco's. It's more than that of other major nuclear powerhouses like BWXT, like Curtiss-Wright, like Canadian Atkins-Realis. So we have Sam Altman. We also have, you know, a board that really, I think, speaks to a lot of the needs of Oklo. So we have Daniel Poneman of Centrus, who have the only HALEU cascade in the country. Oklo requires HALEU, at least from what we know about its earlier design applications. Chris Wright, now the Secretary of Energy, was on the board as well. We have Lieutenant General John Jansen, a former U.S. Marine Corps general, 3-star general. I understand one of the news headlines was that Oklo had a deal with an airbase in Alaska. A friend of mine was saying, well, listen, if the U.S. Air Force has contracted with them, I mean, this must infer a certain amount of due diligence and certainty. But in any case, a real star-studded board here. If you have any comments on that, and then I'd like to get into talking a little bit about their fuel, because that's something where I think their calculations have been a little bit optimistic in terms of estimating a cost of HALEU, for instance, of something like $7,000 a kilo.
Yeah. So on the board, I mean, like you said, they've really assembled a star-studded crack team of individuals who would be able to have good control, and a lot of them do have some good experience. But what some of the members of the board, former members of the board now, like Sam Altman and Chris Wright, these two in particular provide access and, for lack of a better word, marketing. In the case of Chris Wright, I mean, when Donald Trump was signing his Unleashing Nuclear Energy executive orders, Jacob DeWitt was in the Oval Office with him and made a speech during that presentation. And how many other nuclear startups would have killed to be in that position? I mean, if that doesn't scream access, then I don't know what does. Sam Altman, similarly, quite in the public eye a lot for his OpenAI work. And while he's no longer on the board because of the way the company has been restructured now that they've gone public, he still holds a substantial stake in the company, around $880 million last I saw. And that means that he is looking for this company to succeed and may well be pushing OpenAI. They have not signed anything formally, of course, but OpenAI is looking for power. They've invested in fusion as well, but they are providing high-profile access that other companies without that kind of people on their board are not going to be able to get.
There was a short report put out by Kerrisdale Capital in November of 2024. Pretty unfortunate time to take a short position. I think Oklo was sitting at around $30 per share at that point. So bad timing. Some of the analysis seemed fairly compelling. They did have a lot of anonymous quotes in there from former NRC commissioners, supposedly, and other people within the industry. But one of the things they really looked at was the unit economics that were being described, which they described as overly rosy, both in terms of, the timelines producing power by 2027, but also cost of fuel. And we do see this across the advanced reactor space. We are seeing a real retreat from HALEU, high-assay low-enriched uranium, which is, quite constrained. The Russians used to provide most of it. There's this tiny cascade of, I think, 16 centrifuges from Centrus that are producing a fairly small amount. The DOE, I think, sits on a bunch of HALEU, and that, again, having connections with the administration may help them access that fuel. But from what I understand, their economics are calculated off a cost of fuel, which may be sort of 5 times too low compared to what the actual price will be. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to look at that sort of data to get a sense of what their projections and cost of power might be.
I did see in their annual report from 2024, they did include, when they were talking about their fuel reprocessing facility, they did include some information on HALEU and what they expect pricing to be. So right now, raw uranium out of the ground is hovering kind of between $80 to $100 a pound. And in order to get HALEU fuel, you need then around we'll call it maybe 60 to 80 SWU. So those are separative work units. So this is basically the amount of centrifuges and spinning and energy that you require in order to get it up to that enrichment. And cost of SWU, again, is around $100 or so per kg by the time you're done. So I think I calculated it out based off of Oklo's own investor guidance, and it was coming out to around $12,000 to $17,000 per kg. So maybe a bit more than the 5,000 that they've quoted elsewhere. The market, of course, has been up and down on the uranium side and enrichment side, especially with interruptions from Russia and constraints in areas like conversion. But that kind of pricing does mean that it is fairly expensive as a material. And that doesn't even include other things that you need to do, such as the handling, the conversions, the fabrications, any other testing and demonstrations that you need to get done. So the unit economics of fuel are quite pricey for HALEU. The big advantage that you have with HALEU, though, is that you can run the reactor for a much longer time. Essentially, that is the whole reason that we're doing any kind of enrichment. Other than just for light water reactors, you need it to get above criticality. But if you can go higher enrichment, then you can run the reactor longer between refueling periods. And in a light water reactor, we're enriching to around 4 to 5%, and that can allow you to operate in the US at least 18 to 24 months. If you have enrichment up to 20%, let's say you did it in the same reactor, it's not quite linear, but it is more or less a straight line. So you'd be able to do it, 4 times longer for an operating cycle, which economically is much better. But if you don't but the fuel is then going to be much more than 4 or 5 times expensive, because enrichment, the cost of the SWUs, the amount of enriching work that you have to do to go from 5 to 20 is enormously more. It's an exponential function. So it's much more expensive to go from, let's say, 5 to 10. It's not twice as expensive to go from 5 to 10 as it was to go from 1 to 5 or 0 to 5. It's 4, 5, 6 times more expensive. And by the time you go up to 20, you're in for 40 or so times more expensive in terms of getting your fuel up to that enrichment. So you really do have to have a good reason for getting up there. And it can be either you want to operate a longer cycle, you want to have a more dense, smaller reactor core, but economics is usually not one of the best reasons for going for higher enrichment. It usually just doesn't work out.
I guess in closing, Michael, if this stock does crash, if investors realize potentially making some due diligence and comparisons with the Russians and Chinese that this may be a steeper hill to climb, what do you think this means kind of more broadly throughout the sector for established OEMs with actual revenue and product lines, and just more generally for the nuclear renaissance? Do you think this is just going to be a curiosity? I mean, certainly we saw NuScale. I mean, their stock is doing well, but they flamed out after the UAMPS project was canceled, and excitement in the nuclear sector carried on. What do you think the potential impacts will be? I guess public perception of nuclear, finance perception of nuclear. What are your thoughts in terms of this being a potential dangerous moment?
Yeah, I think this is quite a dangerous moment. Again, looking at Oklo stock, and it's gone, straight to the moon over the last, even over the last month, enormous increases. And if that's not screaming bubble territory, then I'm not sure what is, because what has fundamentally changed over the last month with Oklo is not a lot. So I'm quite afraid that this is hype and speculation coming from either retail investors, people that see it's doing very well. Again, Oklo presents their story quite well. They have a very charismatic CEO who can talk about it and make it very simple and appealing to people that don't spend a lot of time in nuclear energy. But for the industry as a whole, it's quite dangerous. You have people that are maybe unsure about nuclear that are now entering, being like, well, this is doing quite well, and I'm financially doing quite well because of it. So I think that, we should continue to do these activities and make them work. But legacy players like Westinghouse, General Electric, to some extent, NuScale as well, these guys that have actual product lines that are they have regulatory approval, that they have mines that are actually producing uranium, they are spinning centrifuges, they have conversion facilities, they're working on existing nuclear plants. There is a real risk that the finance that is chasing companies like Oklo and getting bundled into this whole nuclear grouping, it can be painful when it comes down. And if that happens, then companies that are maybe in stronger positions technically, or they have a different path for commercialization or some other approach. They're taking some other approach other than Oklo. And suddenly that money is no longer available. Then we're set back to where we were maybe 10 years ago, where we have companies like, you have really only the big players at that point. You have Westinghouse, you have a couple of startups, NuScale being, one that has been around for a while. You have some other very small ones that are kind of scraping for some Department of Energy type of small funds, these, advanced reactor type of funds, a few $100,000. But the big money that could actually drive a lot of these projects and drive a lot of progress, it disappears because there's either not trust or there's not a belief that these projects will actually be able to follow through. And I think there's a real danger of Oklo overpromising, within 2 years, we're going to have a reactor up and running. They don't have any licensing. We haven't seen anything. It takes the Russians 10 years, the Chinese 20 years with these large organizations. How is Oklo going to do that with 120 people? Even if they double that staff, they're still way behind.
You just couldn't hire enough people in the Anglosphere to staff that with expertise in sodium fast reactor technology. Like, it's just, I think in the West we just really have to acknowledge that we are in a critical sort of human resources crunch when it comes to some of these technologies. Michael, we could talk all day. It's been fascinating. Thank you for this analysis. Definitely, I'm really grateful as well for you getting those numbers from Rosatom to get us, real data-driven analysis here. Thank you again for coming on Decouple, and I think it probably won't be long till we see your face here again.
Awesome. Anytime.
And for those watching as well, do check out and subscribe to the Atomic Blender on YouTube. There is a lot of great analysis happening there. We will throw that up in the show notes. Today's episode was made possible through a generous donation from the Xerxes Foundation and from listeners like you making pledges on our Substack. If you'd like to join the tribe, please do head over to our Substack, smash that pledge button, or if you would like a tax-deductible receipt, you can hit the donate button and make a contribution through our fiscal sponsor. We genuinely appreciate your support. It is only through your generosity that we are able to continue to offer energy literacy on demand.